Hello,
Oh,
welcome. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thomas Vinterberg, the writer, director, and the amazing star, Mads Mikkelsen. Thank you guys for being here to talk about this film, which is such a delight and so illuminating and fascinating in so many ways. I just enjoyed it so much, and I know everyone here probably enjoyed it so much too. And we have a lot of questions, and I have a lot of questions, so I'm really excited for this conversation. But first, I have to ask, just like Thomas, where did this idea come from? How did you find this theory that human beings are born with a deficit of alcohol?
well, first I looked at world history and I saw how many great and fantastic things that have been accomplished by people who are very drunk. Um, Generals, politicians, artists, writers, all over the world at all times. Then someone sent me this theory, which academically speaking does not sum up to real theory, which is just something a psychiatrist said and wrote in a book. And we called him and we discussed this and we decided to base the film upon this theory, which is just something I call it.
Right, of course. It's not totally a scientifically proven theory, but it's a theory that a guy had one time. But I love that you mentioned world history. I've been thinking a lot about how, when the founding fathers were writing the Constitution, apparently they were all drinking a ton of cider at the time all day long. So it's true that, Churchill and Hemingway and all of these amazing people who created amazing art or did amazing things were kind of sauced when they did it.
Well, think about this. Churchill decides to send a couple of 100,000 civilians into war in fisher boats. And if history speaks right, he might not have been sober when making this decision. The question is, would he have made this decision if he was? It's there's a lot of things to be thought about there.
So Mods, when Thomas brought this script to you, this idea to you, or floated the idea to you, what was your initial reaction to hearing what Another Round was about?
I was just waiting for an excuse to be drinking 40 days in a row. I no, I was. He pitched this story for me a long time ago. I believe in 2013 or something. At that point, they were not high school teachers. My character was working as at the control tower in an airport, which obviously laid ground for a lot of funny incidents. So everything he pitched was funny and interesting, and the theory itself, I think it's of course it's true. We all know what that is. 2 glasses of wine. We know that the conversation is lifting. We know that we become more brave. We forget some of our troubles. We might even be able to pick up that phone and make that important phone call we don't dare doing. So we know there's something true in there. 2 glasses is very different than 2 bottles, of course, and that's the topic of the film.
I love that it was almost an air traffic controller. I feel like it could have been a little bit more of a suspense thriller or an action film at that
Yeah.
point. I mean, being in charge of high school students while a little bit tipsy is, has its own, high stakes issues in it. But, I definitely think I had some teachers with some just alcohol on their breath. So, we've all been there.
That's
Or
true.
maybe, but
We all remember those.
but I think that's another one of the things that makes this film, which is like rather a, sort of offbeat idea, but what it ties into are these really universal themes of feeling lost or just a sense of ennui in your life, not really feeling passionate or energized. And I think that, everyone can kind of relate to that and understand those themes really, really well. And I'm wondering, Mads, like your performance is conveying this person who exists in these 2 polarities. He's very reserved and kind of dealing with a lot of inner turmoil, but then he's also, euphoric and kind of finding this release through alcohol. So what was your approach to this character and this performance? I mean, was it something that you related to, or did you have to kind of like really dive into Martin and his issues?
I don't relate to the standstill in his life. I am, by nature, a very curious person. I do enjoy the fact that the sun rises every morning and it makes me curious what's behind that house. And Martin is, obviously, he's standing on the platform and the train has left him. He's not curious anymore. So my approach was, I think that we both agreed on that, you know, the first couple of times that he starts teaching under the influence, what is not insane, but he's kind of liberated. That was the old Martin. That was the Martin he was 25 years ago. So he's finding himself through those theories. And then, of course, he takes it a little further and other things are happening. What I did relate to in the film was the idea of, you know, it's a life-embracing film. It's obviously the energy or the thing that is consuming the film is the alcohol, but within that there is obviously a film about embracing life. And this is a man who is partly disappointed on his past and quite a bit jealous on the future when he's seeing all these kids around him, and he's forgotten how to embrace the present. And so that is his journey in the film.
Well, it definitely comes through, especially at the end. I know I really want to talk about the end of the film because I think it's such a special ending, and it's a complicated film because it really deals with sort of the agony and the ecstasy that all of these four friends go through, and the dark side of things doesn't shy away from that. But the ending is just, it is about unlocking joie de vivre without, you know, just through yourself. And the dancing is incredible. So Mads, are you a dancer? Do you have a dance background? I mean, you have to have been a dancer.
Yeah, I used to be a dancer. I was a professional dancer for not a long career, but 9 years, I believe.
That's a long time.
Yeah, and I started late, like I do with everything in life. So I did that for 9 years, and that turned into acting later on. So yes, it was already written in the story. Thomas had this idea, and it was obvious that we would make Martin not a professional dancer, but at least he'd done it as a hobby, what we call jazz ballet back home. So that was a theme. So there was a discussion where it should be placed. It was, at one point, it was in the middle of the film, and then it ended up, rightly so, at the end of the film. But the bigger discussion was how to pull it off. I was very reluctant. I had an idea that could come across quite pretentious, and maybe I wanted to be a little more like a magical dream, a drunken man's fantasy, taken out of reality. And Thomas was always very nice and listening to me and nodding and listening. But he said, no, you're just dancing, Mads, for real. And I gave in, and he was absolutely right. But it was a bit of a struggle. Am I right, Thomas?
You're right. You can actually see it in the scene a little bit, reflected in the choreography. He's dancing a little bit, then he's pulling away, and then he's dancing a little bit more, and then he's pulling away again. And then finally he gives in and devotes himself and flies. And that was pretty much how the process went down.
So Thomas, were you always like looking for an opportunity to showcase his dancing skills on screen? Not just that necessarily in this movie, but any film. You're like, I'm going to get it in there some way.
I always felt that having this amazing actor and knowing that he can also dance was like an opportunity that had to be used and challenged at some point. But this is how I approach actors. I want to, unfold all the nice little gifts that they have embedded in them. And but this one was a big one. It was a dream for me for a while. And the idea of a teacher suddenly ending up in a dance like this was obviously a bit of a stretch and had to be prepared well in the film, and was something that Tobias Lindholm, the co-writer, and myself was discussing over and over again. Is this real? How can this become real? And there was a lot of work behind that. But that only proves how much I wanted it. I wanted him to dance at the end of the story.
Well, I also love the ambiguity of the ending, especially for a film like this that deals with something that, it's everyday life. Like everybody, either drinks or deals with drinking in some way in their lives, and it's part of our culture. But it's not prescriptive about you should do this or you should do that. And I appreciate that about the film very much, even though it explores all aspects of drinking. But I think that the ambiguity at the end, especially, we don't even know where he lands. I mean, Mads, where did you land when you took that flying leap? Like in the drink, so to speak?
I landed in a very, very cold water. And I was so proud of that shot. It was quite a high leap, actually. And we shot it a couple of times. So we had an underwater camera. So it did not end up in the film. And that was just a fraction of me that was a little annoyed with that. But no, it has to end there. The question is obviously, is the man flying or is the man falling? And that's exactly why we wanted to end the film. And people can interpret that the way they want. You ask me and you ask Thomas, he's flying.
Yeah. Here in Denmark, where the film has been a massive box office success, you have youngsters sitting with a bag of beer, watching the film for the fourth time on their way out to town. But next to them, you have anonymous alcoholics who finds that the movie's about them.
Right.
And we always, both Mads, me, and the writer, Tobias, always wanted the film to be open. It's an exploring film. We wanted to steer away from any sense of morality or too much provocation. We wanted this to be a survey of alcohol and of life. The word spirit is embedded in the word inspiration. And we had the ambition of making a film about more than just alcohol, but about the art of living and the art of living successfully. And to me, the end, it was important. It became a beautiful catastrophe, and that it ended in ecstasy. We have a guy who didn't make it, and then we have Mads who should be flying. And then dropping into the water and everything became cold and real again. It was a bit of a disappointment. So we kept him flying.
Maybe that can be a deleted scene on the Blu-ray when it comes out, the underwater footage.
Right. Does anyone see that kind of stuff anymore? I don't know. But yeah, it could be. I'm happy to show.
Right. I mean, I'd look for it. I also absolutely adored the scene where the four friends get very drunk on Sazeracs, and then they attempt to procure some fresh codfish to comedic ends. My first question is, how did you decide on a Sazerac? Because I thought that was like a very specific choice that was really interesting, because it's a regional cocktail, very known in New Orleans. So I was just curious if you had like a special connection to that drink.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I've had a few, but what was great about the Sazerac is it's made to look like a cocktail, but it's pure alcohol. Right. It's basically getting you very drunk very fast. And that was what this chapter was about, getting above the limits of alcohol intake. So maintaining a sense of elegancy and yet still just get very quickly very drunk was sort of embedded in that particular drink, and which comes with many recipes, and a lot of people have a lot of love towards that drink, and it has put many people in very interesting situation. Like
trying to go fishing for codfish in the middle of the day. Exactly. But that's such an interesting scene because it's kind of the most broadly comedic scene in the film, and it kind of ties into this idea that I wanted to ask you about the tone of the film, in terms of like having elements that are comedic, but then also having tragic elements and balancing that pathos. And it feels so real to life because life is sad and life is funny and life is weird, and you find yourself in absurd situations and you create that so authentically. So is that just like finding the right group of actors who and who know each other, or how is that on the page? I mean, how do you achieve that sense of tonal balance?
Well, I was just about to ask what tone. I mean, this film is so full
Right.
of different tones and notes and directions.
Right.
And it's very interesting because as a filmmaker, my instinct is, of course, to tame the beast and create a stringent vision. And but every time we tamed it, either it was in the script or in the editing, we sort of killed it a little bit. The structure of this film had to be drunk with them. And you know, we at some point the codfish scene was cut out because it was just
No.
it was just not as tasteful as the rest of the movie. But it
Right.
killed it, and we needed it back in. The sense
Well, it
of
was a tricky scene, though. I mean, it was a tricky scene in many ways because, as you said, it was maybe the most comedian scene, and there was part of us that we were aware of that, and I think that Thomas also wanted it to go that direction. But for the DOP, the cameraman, it was just it was a nightmare because he had four kids that was going in each their own direction, so he couldn't really capture us at the same time. Even though we were not drinking, we kind of got intoxicated by the situation. It was smitten between each other. And there was people inside the boat. Somebody was in the water. Somebody was up in the mast. And at the end of the day, it was just too much. So you really had to control some of that, though.
right. But you're talking about a sense of realism or truthfulness in the movie, which obviously comes down to asking the 4 best actors in my country to be a part of this movie, because I really did challenge them. They had to be funny, they had to dance, they had to be drunk, and they had to protect a super refined emotional journey as well. So they were tested to the limits, and not everyone could have done that.
You really are asking them to play so many different notes in this
Wow.
emotional range. It's not just one, you know, range all the way through. It's like all over the place. You know, it's tragedy, it's comedy, and that's so impressive to be able to do all of that.
I agree with that, and they have my deepest respect, not the least the guy here next to us, Mr. Mikkelsen. But also another thing is that we wrote the script for these 4 names, and of course that gives you a head start in the process of trying to make things as truthful as possible.
And authentic, because you sort of know what their characters are or what they can authentically play, or sort of attune the character to each actor.
Right. And then at the end, there's the editor who cuts away the stuff where, you know, the drunk stuff that was a bit too much, or, you know, like the codfish scene. It was a balance, really. When it was a little bit longer, it was just another film, and it was just way too much. And it really was a balance. Yeah, so it took a lot of work from a lot of people, but primarily a lot of great work from 4 fantastic actors.
So, Mads, what is the key to authentically acting drunk on screen?
I think the way most actors will approach it, which we also did, is that it comes in different stages, right? So when we're talking about 2 or 3 drinks, that's you try to hide it. It's a little like in our personal and private life. You don't want your neighbor to see it, so you hide it. You move a bit slower, you're a little more precise in your movements, and then obviously that gives you away. So that would be the approach that we always go to as actors, you know. But we, of course, had to go all in into the Charlie Chaplin level, where you don't care anymore. You don't care if people see it. You're in a different world, and for that, I think we can remember some of it. It's not always you can remember you've been that drunk, so that's not really useful. But then you go on YouTube and you watch some Russians go completely ballistic, you know, and there is tons of material in there, and it's so insane and it's so over the hill that as actors we kind of feel if they can get away with that, so can we. But there are certain tricks. Obviously, it's not just strange movements. They're always very focused on a task that's right ahead of them. And that task is never fulfilled, of course. And they fall, and when they fall, they do not use their hands at all. They just use their faces. So we had to come up with some hidden mattresses once in a while to go for it.
Were there any mishaps on set? Like you mentioned the codfish scene with the DP unable to kind of get you all in frame together. I mean, are there any stories from the set or from the shoot that were, things
I
got
think it
out of
was a,
hand?
no, not out of hand, but I think that was one of the main things. That once you get that wild card, you go for it, and you trust each other. We have 4 actors and a director. We trust each other, and it becomes intoxicating to be in that situation, and there'll be a lot of times where you're doing a scene and you think we nailed it, but we realized that the cameraman wasn't even there because we were hiding in the bottom of the boat, because you forget everything about you. So that was like, we had to, reel back once in a while and say, we have to put a little structure on some of this because we're just behaving like little kids now, right? But I mean, once you're in there and it feels real and it's attached, as you talked about before, to something authentic, then that's the joke, or that's the fun we want to come across with. We don't want to make jokes for the sake of a joke. We want it to be hooked up on something authentic, of course. But when you start playing and behaving like little kids, then that's where you need some structure.
Thomas, one of the things that I thought was really interesting about the film was the way that they approach the theory, and they're writing a scientific paper and they're doing experiments. And I almost felt like, I mean, I loved that structure of it where they're upping the ante every, couple of weeks or whatever. But I also felt like it kind of almost felt like a satire of this life hack sort of culture that we've gotten into, if you do fasting, you'll unlock some, high performance. If you do meditation, if you do whatever, if you do paleo diet, like I feel like we're all searching for this answer, this, magic bullet to like cure us of our ills, and whether it's fasting or meditation or drinking, having constantly being buzzed on 2 glasses of wine. I mean, it almost felt to me a little bit like that. Were you thinking about that at all, or?
Well, yeah, to some extent it was a reaction against that, a satire on that, and a satire of this very chaste and confined life that we're living. It's a film about letting yourself become uncontrollable. It's a film about losing control and winning something by losing control. And so, if anything, this film was a fight for the uncontrollable. Our lives are so measured down to how many steps we take. Our cell phones are measuring that. And my daughters have to lay out plans for their education at a very early stage. And when you write an article for a newspaper, on your screen, there'll be the number of clicks your article gets, right? So even you journalists has to think about clickbaits, and everything is about that. And in this world, we forget about the uncontrollable a little bit. The uncontrollable can be a beautiful thing. It can be such as falling in love. That's beyond your control. It says that you fall and then suddenly you meet something grand. When you get an idea, when you get inspired, it's also beyond your control. It's just something that comes to you. Now, putting a bottle to your lips is sort of a contract with the uncontrollable. You go into a room of something that you don't know where it's going to end. Either I'm going to get beaten up, or I'm going to end in bed with someone, or a third thing. But at least it's beyond my control. And we enjoyed that. Maybe because our lives are pretty controlled.
Well, I love that idea, and especially the way it ties into the ending of him releasing all control, falling into the water and everything. But the initial approach is to control it, right? To say, we're going to have this much, we're going to write it down, we're going to do, we're going to do it like a proper scientific experiment. And so sort of over the course of that, they realize that they can't control what they're doing.
Well, with all good experiments and with all great art, actually, it's framed, it's set up. Even in your childhood, when you played games and you had to shoot each other, when you got shot, you had to count to 10. And if you only count to 7 and then got up, the game was destroyed. So of course you have to make your set of rules and make it sharp
Right.
and stringent. And then within those frames, they can go personas. Yeah.
But it's not that it's getting out of control. I mean, I think they're fairly focused in the sense that if 2 drinks is good, why wouldn't 4 drinks be twice as good? You know,
Right.
that's the logic. As long as they
That's
feel
the mistake.
they're in control, that's the logic, obviously. And at a certain point, they lose that logic. But I think that's quite a normal approach. 2 is good, 4 is twice as good, right?
I've definitely had a night like that.
But it's an interesting thing because we were talking about curiosity. We're talking about putting your own life at risk. We're talking about being open and explorative in your life, being inspired, basically. And people are asking me, can this happen without alcohol? And I'm saying, of course. We had that on our film. The guy playing Tommy, he's an anonymous alcoholic, and he's living a super inspired and open and creative life. Of course you can, but a lot of people forget to do so. Mm-hmm. A lot of people end in a everyday life which bores them to death.
Well, I'm going to take some questions from the audience. We got some good questions coming. So the first one says, music seems to play an important part in Martin's story. His reaction to the singers in the restaurant, Tchaikovsky, the children singing outside the church. Can you tell us more about the role of music in the film?
Right. To make this film as real as possible, I decided not to go with the traditional score, commenting, creating an atmosphere. I wanted Mads and his friends to create the atmosphere. And then I sort of made a rule for myself saying, but they can hear music that exists in this universe, and we can play it a couple of times even as a score. But and that way the songs became very important. Also, this is a portrait of our country. It's in many ways it's a celebration of our country and the beautiful songs of our country. Also, I think music is so related to the ecstasy of getting drunk. And when it comes to the end scene, that particular song has become inseparable from the movie, I think. We chased some very expensive rights all over the world for a long time. And my wife just kept saying, there's a Danish band, they have the song you need. And she just kept playing it for me. And finally I gave into it. And now I'm deeply in love with that song.
Even the song, what is that? I can't remember the name of that great soul music song in the Sazerac scene, but that's just like evokes such a mood.
It's called Sissy Strut.
Yes. I knew it was Sissy something, but I couldn't remember the second word.
The meters.
Yes.
That took a long time to find because it had to be cool. It could not be too hectic, vibrant, young, because that would make them look old. Mm-hmm. And yet still it had to be a celebratory, upbeat moment. There was a lot of, things going on. I think we listened to 1,000 songs before this sort of came into place. And then a lot of musicians also did not want to appear in a film about drinking. So, that was a bit of a struggle.
So this is a question. So this is a question for Thomas and then one for Mads. Were there any scenes that you struggled to write, Thomas? And then for Mads, were there any scenes that you struggled in performing or that you had a hard time with in performing?
Well, I struggled a little bit with the long scene in the restaurant in the beginning where Mads ends in tears. Because I wanted it to be long and I wanted it to sort of be a film in the film. And because our main character was already crying in the 19th minute of the movie, which is unusual. So it really had to build up in the right way. And that little symphony in itself was something that demanded a lot of work in the writing and in the editing. Maybe the one that took most work.
And then Mads, did you have a scene that was challenging to film or perform?
have to watch what I'm saying now because it might look challenging. I think that, like the other film I did with Thomas called The Hunt, it might look difficult, but when it's that well written, you kind of lean into it, and it makes it much easier. The most difficult scenes that for an actor are the scenes that's not working. The scenes that just you can't figure out how to solve this because it's not written the way it's supposed to. And we didn't have any of those scenes. They were all well written. We were struggling as an entire cast, I guess, with some scenes, especially the funeral scene, the church scene. But that was for other reasons than material. That was for private reasons.
I love that the funeral scene reminds me of the amazing child Specs. I loved him so much. What a great addition.
And
he broke my heart.
This is, believe it or not, he was a little annoyed with being cast for that specific part because he was like the kid who wasn't that good at soccer. He was the best of the kids playing soccer. He was a tiny little Messi. He was a genius with a ball. So we held him back a little. But in the little breaks he had, he showed us how good he was. Yeah, he was a. He's like.
He's like, I got to prove that I'm actually good at soccer. Yeah. Okay, a couple more questions. For Thomas, can you please talk a little bit about the choices you made with the camera movement changes as the characters spiral deeper into drinking throughout the film?
Right. Sturla, I think you would call him in America. Sturla is the name of the DOP, and I had meetings about this. And we agreed to portray reality in its edgy, not musical, not smooth kind of way, with rigid movements, loud sounds that suddenly appears and interrupt what you're about to say, the awkwardness of reality. And then when they started drinking, we wanted it to smoothen up and become a pleasure, like a 747 taking off into the sunset, so that we sort of enjoyed the alcohol and felt the alcohol in their blood and their veins. And then, of course, when it becomes trashy and horrible later, it becomes muddy again in the camera. But he's the kind of cameraman who's super sensitive to what's happening. So the scenes and the actors and the atmosphere of the scene pretty much dictated what the camera did.
And were you primarily working handheld, Steadicam?
Solely handheld.
Okay.
Everything in this movie is handheld. Mm-hmm. Because he's fantastic at doing that, and because I wanted that truthfulness that comes with the handheld camera. And
he's the operator as well, the camera operator?
Right.
Okay.
Which is normal in our humble shire.
Well, you never know if the DP standing to the side, giving directions, or, I guess they all have different styles.
Katie, our film crews are just smaller, so we have to deal with more things.
Well, there was a question actually relating to that for Mads, which is that just talking about the difference between making films in Denmark and making, US blockbusters, is there a preference for one or the other, or, how do you feel about the two different styles of production?
Well, I feel good about both of them. I grew up with what we're doing here in Another Round. This is our approach to making films. So, of course, I feel at home in a different way than I do when I go to a big set and they have a spider camera and the shot is, controlled by a computer. But that's also interesting to find the truth in that moment. There is something with the handheld. Of course, it's as if it's our shadow. It's always there. It's there. It will capture what needs to be captured. It's a different way of working together when you're having cranes and spider cameras, and we always try to make it a small set, a small situation, a truthful little situation, and trying to forget the surroundings. That is obviously much easier when it's going on a level that we do in Denmark, but it's part of our job. I don't I don't want to choose between the two. I love both.
Well, it's almost like you have to have the balance. Like you go try something different, and then you go home and ground yourself with your longtime collaborators and friends.
Exactly. Both things are inspiring to the other. So they go hand in hand to a degree.
Right. For Thomas, the question is, why did you use that particular quote from Kierkegaard at the beginning of the film?
The quote in the beginning is a quote about youth and about getting older. There's an endless amount of ways to analyze that quote, which I think is part of the beauty of it. But it does remind me of the weightlessness of being young, what these four characters are yearning for, and what I occasionally am yearning for. You know, I remember being 16 and a little bit drunk, 4 o'clock in the morning, in my flowered garden, slightly in love, and feeling that I was flying, feeling the weightlessness. And I think the words from Kierkegaard reflects on that in the most precise and beautiful way. But he's quoted a couple of times throughout the movie. And he's probably the man ever who's been reflecting on lack of control in the most elaborate way. What, you know, the gifts you can get, the gifts that you can get from letting go of control.
That's a wonderful answer to that question. Let's look at more audience questions. Are you planning to collaborate together again anytime soon?
Yes.
The two of you. Anything in the works or nothing that you can talk about yet?
No, I don't know what he's up with, but my plan is one day you just have to pick up the phone and I'm ready.
Ah, that's beautiful. You know, there's no such thing I would rather do than to work with Mads. And it's been such a joyride both times. And I think we've come very far both times. And the abilities and the strength Mads has as a friend and as an actor would make me want to go back to that. But it requires the perfect thing. I would never do a half step towards him. It would have to be a full-on approach.
You have to have the fully formed idea and then, you know, sort of present him with that.
It has to be the right thing.
Yeah, the right thing.
Yeah. He can play everything, but you know what I mean. It has to be worthy.
Just my 2 cents. I think a musical with dancing should be the next project.
Wow.
You ready for that, Mads?
Wow, now I'm getting reluctant again. Let me think about it.
You know, totally grounded, authentic, handheld. We just want to see more dancing.
You have to understand, nobody, and I mean nobody, wants to pay to listen to me sing. For good reason.
Okay. We'll work around that. We'll work around that. There's ways of getting around that.
I have to say about the dancing scene in this film, maybe people love that scene so much because it's earned. You know, they've been through 20 minutes of severe darkness right before, and there's an element of disappointment about this concept that didn't work, ended up not working for them. And then finally, there's, you know, if he'd been dancing throughout the movie, it would have been a bit.
It's true. It's very surprising in many ways, but also I totally agree with you that like any sort of, you know, cinematic catharsis, whether it's like violence or emotion or, you know, right, euphoric dancing, like it does need to be earned and like have the audience invested in that happening. So you're totally right that it's like the euphoria that we kind of need, that release. It's like you create that for the audience.
Non-singing musical.
Yeah, we'll figure something out. You know, a dance film or something.
Just send me the script. I'll look at it.
So another question, have you noticed the drinking culture of various countries having an effect on how the film was received there? Or was it more surprising to learn how universal drinking culture can be? And this, I know you said that like this film has been a huge success in Denmark, and I'm just curious, like, has it caused any conversations or about drinking, or it seems like it inspires honesty about drinking in a way.
It seems like so far every country it has met, people have a very strong relation to and history with alcohol. But also, it seems that people understand that the movie is about more than alcohol, and that it's about universal themes such as being in your midlife, being inspired and uninspired, and so forth. It surprised me a little bit that in a world of confinement, death, and the world of Corona, basically, bankruptcies and stuff, that the film landed as such a revelation for people. I was afraid it would land slightly irrelevant. And it seems that the opposite has happened. They need to see people embrace and dance and drink and sweat all in the same room. It's apparently something people are missing.
Yeah, I think that's, everyone is craving that connection, being in a bar, having drinks with friends. My friend Bill Ross, who's a documentary filmmaker who made a film about a bar, he was saying, oh my God, I can't wait to be drinking Sazeracs and listening to Sissy Strut with my friends again. And I think that we're all kind of relating to that sense of connection that you can find having drinks with friends or dancing with a bunch of high school teenagers on a pier, or at a bar, whatever it is. And it's like that we're getting a little piece of that in this film. But yes, it is about so much more than just alcohol. It becomes this really philosophical journey into like unlocking the part of yourself that can feel uncontrollable or can be receptive and open to joy and to everything that life has to offer, the highs and the lows.
But I think the reason. I think I've often said that Thomas has made his most Italian film, and what I mean with that is not that it's an Italian topic. I mean that it doesn't matter how dark or sad or brutal an Italian film is, you always leave the movie theater with a sense of loving life. And I think that's what this film does. This film is a life-embracing film. And as Thomas said, young people, old people, middle-aged people leave the theater with a feeling of wanting to embrace life.
Of wanting to run around a lake with a box of beer and vomit.
That is like universal across cultures. Like I know guys who would do running and chugging beer races, and I'm like, this really must be like some ancient primal ritual.
Well,
it's just cheaper. You get your pulse up, you get drunk much faster. It's just cheaper.
Yeah, I don't know how much time we have left, but one of the sort of kickstarts for this movie was that I had a visitor from Hollywood. She was writing a film with me. It took off with, it didn't happen, but she stayed with me for a week. She was very, very intelligent, and she's an American. And she meets my daughter, and she says, "So what are you going to do today, Nana?" And Nana says, "Oh, I'm going to run the lake run." And this woman says, "So what's that?" "Oh, I have to run around a lake and empty a box of beer." And this woman looks at me like, when is the father going to interfere? When is he going to stop this? And I don't, because I'm a Scandinavian and I'm used to drunk kids in the street. And she goes, "But don't you get sick, Nana?" And she goes, "Oh yeah, but if we vomit synchronized, time will be deducted, so that's okay." And this woman gets a little bit more disturbed. And then she says, "What about the police?" And Nana says, "Oh, but the teachers are there." And when I saw her American head fall apart in that moment, I thought, there's something about Danish drinking culture that I need to explore. But apparently, this is happening all over the world.
Well, it is interesting because you're sort of confronted by someone else saying, this is strange. And you're like, no, it's not. This is what I grew up with. And, I grew up in a culture where the drinking age was 18 and I was going to bars and, I wasn't doing a lake run because we didn't have a lake, but, it is interesting to kind of see those, little points of friction. But the track team at my college did a what they called a beer mile. So that was a similar, I don't know if the rules are exactly the same, but it was a similar setup.
Right. Yeah, well, drinking is universal and has been here forever.
Yes. Well, I think that is all the time we have for now, but thank you so much for joining the American Cinematheque and for me and me for, having, talking to me about this film. It's such a great film. I loved it. I can't wait to see what you guys do next. And this was a great discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Katie, Mads, Thomas, thank you again. Thank you. It was a wonderful conversation. We're so happy to have all three of you. To our audience, thank you for tuning in. Make sure you watch Another Round if you haven't seen it yet. It's widely available on VOD. And please join us for our conversations next weekend for Night of the Kings and Promising Young Woman. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.